You didn't think I was going to come back to YouTube and not react to Narc, did you? I didn't realize until just now that Steven, after this previous live stream, did a Q&A stream on apparently twitch.tv/TheoryForge. So, let's... Or wait, how does Narc say it? Let's begin, shall we?
Long-standing Ashes of Creation podcast just did their 100th episode with the mighty Stephen Sharif, asking a bunch of great community questions for this highly anticipated MMORPG. And today...
Over or under 10% chance Narc wears no pants during these.
I'm going to break down all the most interesting questions for you guys, because they touched on some really pressing community concerns.
Okay.
Now, with all that bollocks out of the way, let's begin, shall we?
Okay. Mine was
So
a little
before we
under,
begin, I want to introduce our hosts.
Oh, my man with the
Phantom
braided
X,
beard.
Legendary Neurotoxin, and the one and only Diggs, the forum-dwelling god with nearly more posts on the forums than I've slept with your mum. That being said, this live stream was much more casual than your average one, not structured in a way that was just a straight-up Q&A, more of a discussion piece, which went on for nearly 2 whole hours and
Good
allowed
Lord.
our hosts to steer Stephen's discussion into more specific areas. This resulted in some great answers. So, the first question was straight up to the point, basically
Let's do it.
asking about the next Node showcase, to which Stephen did confirm it is coming this month as a full, over 1 hour live stream presentation. He
What?
further elaborated about some upcoming
What?
article.
What? Node showcase this month? Nodes? Oh my god. We got the world boss, which I haven't got to see yet. I just know it's a Cyclops, who fucking looks cool as hell. Into the professions, into the freeholds, into the nodes. Guys, do we exist? Is this real? Is the game gonna happen? What?
Related to freeholds with their building types and what's being offered to players and all that good stuff coming next week. So we've got that to click, but look forward to soon.
Truth.
The next discussion was related to the recent addition of Trost and what made him a good lead design role for Ashes of Creation, and what Stephen
the
is
guy
expecting
from-
to change now that he...
I don't remember. I know he came from a game to here. I don't remember if it was Arcade or RuneScape, or he came from a game that was great and then slowly went, and then now he's here though.
He's part of the team. Well, as you'd expect, with Bill Trost being one of the forefathers of the MMORPG genre and his experience since all the way back in EverQuest, Trost has a massive range of experience when it comes to what makes an MMORPG good and, what made them fail. As he's
the guy
very
from Willow?
old school in Origin, the team
that
expect
word?
Trost's contributions to be highly focused on bringing back the massively multiplayer, the teamwork-focused synergies, and the immersive
Amen.
social
Preach it.
structure
Say it
that
louder
makes
for the ones in the back.
MMORPGs unique to the rest of the gaming genre. It's all great stuff to hear, and I'm really looking forward to finally seeing him on stream at some point in the future. Now, I will admit, due to this particular Q&A style, a few of the questions got lost in the sauce a little, so I think we'll skip a few and touch upon the 4 major questions that really provided us with either decent clarification or new interesting information that we can look forward to for Alpha 2 related to the freeholds, the classes, and some naval systems. As freeholds are a hot
know
topic
what
this
belly
month,
buttons have
we'll
to do with
start
anything,
with a
but-
question related to the bidding system involved with the acquisition of freehold plots and parcels.
good.
Stephen did indeed confirm
what you get with
a
100 episodes.
speculation that's been going on in the Discord where the world structure
I've said it before, and I don't know if it's been recent or if you're just new here, but I always say interviewing or having somebody on your podcast or your stream or whatever asking questions. So interviewing is a skill set. I think it's not just asking questions in a line. Interviewing somebody to get information that you would like or to get specific reactions or things like that is a skill set. It is something that you have to practice at, and really some people are very gifted and talented naturally at it. Some people have to work really hard at it. The only reason I'm aware of this is my wife is a video editor and producer, and one of her favorite things to do or film are documentaries, so she had to really practice at interviewing people or teaching people how to interview so that she could get the reactions and the information she wanted. So when he says that they were able to get these out of Steven, it just means these guys are doing a really good job. Somebody or all of them have worked really hard at being able to ask the right questions and steer the conversation. So many kudos to the three guys that are doing this interview.
Which looks something like this, with one freehold plot per segment. It turns out that yes, this is how it functions. However, the bidding system is where the real juicy information came in. Steven discussed the idea of a 2 or 3 layered system involving node-specific currencies that are also used on top of the standard gold. Favor for divine nodes or honor for military nodes, but it's also supplemented by a third system that he called character-bound certificates. These so-called certificates.
What? I like a node-specific system that changes per node, because then if I spend all my time in this node, I can't just build up all my resources and then try to go dominate a new node. If I'm in a military node and then I'm jumping to a religious node, I can't just show up with my fucking big sacks. Your big bags of money and show up and just try to dominate because I wouldn't have the honor or the divine favor or whatever. That's actually really cool.
Have been discussed many times in the past, but Intrepid have not really elaborated on such a system just yet. Steven concluded this question with a statement that I'd rather you hear from Steven himself, because, well, it was another classic Steven speech.
But what I would say is that it's very important to note that while you are seeing kind of, gameplay and the game looks great, and I always see people saying, hey, this game's ready to launch now, launch it. This looks better than other games that I'm playing that have been released for 10 years, whatever. The intent behind our design approach is to methodically create, because this is such an ambitious project with so many interdependent systems that are very intricately necessary to work well with one another, is that we go through these iteration phases, not just external iteration phases like Alpha 2, but internally as we play test these things. And you guys are hearing in somewhat real time our design direction. And so keeping a grain of salt with these topics as we give these definitions, that these designs are all subject to change, right? And they should be.
True. Bruh.
The prophecies had been forgotten. We obsessed over old grudges.
Overall, I think it's important to remember that all of this is subject to change, right?
I love it.
This Alpha 2 development stage.
So it makes a good point. We always talk about one of the big benefits for me, for Ashes, is the fact that they are open with their design process and that they are not as egotistical as to say what they have chosen to do is the only way to do it, or the right way, or the best way. Being open to conversation, which can spur ideas, which can develop ideas and systems and processes, and developing them in real time, and being flexible to develop a better system. I think that's one of the biggest things that has held me on to supporting this and creating content for this specific game. The studio is the way they're approaching design, their design philosophy in general.
Is a highly volatile development state, changing from player feedback that comes from the perspective that hasn't even touched the game yet. So I think it's best that we don't think too hard on these specific niche systems. Speaking of niche systems, the naval mechanics were discussed a lot during today's Q&A, and I want to break it down into 3 parts. First of all, corruption and death on the open seas was touched upon, giving Steven the chance to elaborate that they're considering almost no to maybe even straight up 0 experience debt when you're killed out on the open seas. I suspect this is all related to their open PvP systems like the node ruins, the node wars, the sieges, where PvP is encouraged, not frowned upon like it is in the open world. So that's some interesting internal design choices that I'm looking forward to seeing come out. Secondly, they talked about the building of ships themselves and how this actually functions as a mechanic. Now, if you're a fan of Arcade, this might not be too new to you, but the team have decided to split the shipbuilding process across multiple professions, requiring parts to come.
I know originally we were talking about there being a shipbuilder profession, and now it's going to be split among professions, which I think is a great decision, simply because, again, it brings other people together. Even if it's just you and your bros, it brings everybody together in order to have one goal of building said ship, and then once the ship is made, you guys now are kind of invested in it, maybe. I kind of like that idea.
together to create the full complete ship. It's pretty much how it works in Arcade, right? But he did mention the use of a unique crafting bench, but this again isn't new news. It did, however, lead us on to a discussion about boats during the Alpha 2, to which Stephen explained that ships will indeed be live during Alpha 2, but not at the launch. And to be honest, that makes sense, right? They're going to introduce the acquisition, the building, and the water mechanics as a larger patch down the line, then try to...
Alpha 2 is going to have ships? They're going to be live? I know not at the launch. Makes sense. It's a live server. It's going to continue on. It's a continual thing. But,
to cram it all into the launch, which, in hindsight, would probably cause a lot of issues like it did in Alpha 1. Now, moving on to the next question, I'm going to paraphrase it slightly because it was essentially asking, what is the aesthetic and mechanical purpose of corruption from a PvE perspective? Well, as we saw during the Tower of Carfin showcase, corruption is kind of like a threat that slowly spreads out and infects part of the world as the story arc system is progressed, and depending on the choices servers make, it can affect areas in different ways. Think kind of like along the lines of New World's little invasion event things, but instead spreading across a whole biome instead of a tiny area. This is how I imagine
like
the end goal
a larger version of maybe like Rift, if anybody played that short-lived MMO.
For this corruption system to be. Stephen described it perfectly as a push-pull between corruption and society, and to be fair, it certainly felt like that during the Carfin showcase, which is a great lead into the next interesting question about the intended gameplay loop that they expect players to participate in. The answer wasn't quite as fluff as I thought it was going to be, because Stephen elaborated that because of Ashes of Creation's player-driven dynamic world, it totally depends what the state of things are in for players to actually know where to direct themselves. The start of a server is going to be insanely different to what we'd expect months down the line as nodes are built, stories are established, and new points of interest open up whole new gameplay loops to the 4 play styles available to Ashes of Creation, which...
Huge thing, right? I've always voiced my opinion, my positive opinion towards this aspect of the game development. Player-driven content and content that evolves alongside of the player base, to me, is just so much more dynamic. You know, like you said, at the very beginning of the game, it's going to be totally different. And what I think is even more fun about the way the server's efforts are going to go at the beginning is that they can, if it spreads across the server board that, hey, we're pretty sure there's a dragon under this mountain in a node that we haven't even gotten to level 2 yet, suddenly, like, server-wide, maybe there'll be a migration over there in order to be a part of the node, to increase the node to the levels to hopefully unleash the dragon and see what it does to the server. That's fucking dope. That's like server-wide participation, server-wide events. That's you texting your buddies like, yo, we're getting on tonight. Did you hear about the node? We're switching nodes. Load up. We're going. We're going to take the whole guild over there. We're going to take all the homies. Like, whatever. Like, that's server-wide participation, server-wide created content. And not just because everybody wants to go to that node, but now everybody's fucking crossing the land to get to the node. Bandits, caravans, whatever needs to happen. You know, now that's even more player-created content. Now, if there's bandits that are starting to off people on their way over there, now the player-created content of let's off the bandits so that we can all get over there, so that we can build the node, so that we can unleash the dragon. Like, that is a really interesting way to plan and develop your game to allow this player-created content to fucking do its thing. So I think that's really cool, and I'm really excited about it. I'm also excited about the fact that if I start a character and I'm investing in it and I don't know, let's say I play for 4 months and I go, you know what, I'm going to start another character for something a little different. The world is going to be drastically different. The leveling process will be different than when I was first starting with everybody else, because different nodes are built, different points of interest are available, different monsters, seasons, roaming the, you know what I mean? So I think it's really cool because it even makes like a tune or two after your main character have a different interaction with the world and the leveling process. And I don't know, in my mind, theoretically, it makes the game stay more fresh, longer, fresher, longer, long-lasting freshness. It's like a bubblegum commercial.
are focused on combat, artisan, PvP, and trading. They're not looking to create a static gameplay loop like you'd expect from your average theme park MMORPG. They're looking to create a dynamic world with ever-changing content that reacts to player behavior and, more specifically, the server that you're on. And now, the final question that really blew everyone's mind was a discussion about the Summoner, Bard, and Tulnar and their availability at the launch of Alpha 2. Steven just straight up answered, the Rogue and Bard are planned for the launch of Alpha 2. However, the Summoner is not. And that kind of makes sense, right? The Summoner is utilizing a bunch of additional tech that is a heavy pet-focused class, so there's no doubt an extra ton of work needs to go into it. In addition, they also mentioned the Tulnar and what kind of state that they're in for Alpha 2, and Steven basically said that we'll be seeing the Tulnar likely coming next year, with the models reveal being somewhat a tentative reveal this.
Completely fair. I'm totally down with that. Wow, that's super exciting. Hold on one second.